and welcome to the Aurora Podcast, where we discuss beyond our textbook topics, as well as explore different career paths in order to advance our understanding.
I'd like to recognize that we are gathered here today at the Whatcom Museum, where they seek to advance our curiosity about the changing natural, cultural, and historic landscapes from the youngest to the oldest minds.
This podcast is designed by students for students, and I'm your host, Ben Land.
I'm your host, Owen Voigt.
And today our guest is Reuben Evans, who's a director and producer. So would you mind introducing yourself a little to our audience and speaking about what you do?
Yeah, so I'm film director and producer, of course. I own a company called Visuals First Films here in Bellingham, and so do an independent film production there. And for the longest time, I worked for Faith Life, also known as Logos Bible Software, here in town for 15 years. We did a bunch of videos and our content as well for our Faith Life TV platform.
Sweet. Yeah. Is there a favorite project you might have been, worked on?
Yeah, we've done a bunch of stuff. I really like the documentary space. We did a documentary called Fragments of Truth, which was really cool. We shot a lot of that over in Europe, and we were able to go to places like Oxford and Cambridge and the Vatican Museum and take a look at some of the oldest little pieces of manuscripts, fragments of the Gospels in the New Testament. And so we're able to see those oldest manuscripts and then begin to kind of learn about the idea of the reliability of those Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. How do you, when working with a documentary, how do you plan out something like that? Because you're learning as you're going.
Yeah, so one of the key things about a documentary is it really helps to have like a host or a main kind of talent. So in that case of Fragments of Truth, we worked with Dr. Craig Evans, also worked with him in Israel on a series called Jesus in Archaeology. And so in this case, with a documentary, you're always asking like, why this now? And in his case, he had published a paper on some archaeological findings, and it really kind of shed light on this area of, could you trust the stories that are written about Jesus in the Gospels? Could you trust those manuscripts? Or are they just been passed down through like a game of telephone, one storyteller to another, and what we have today doesn't bear any resemblance to what was originally written? So he had published a paper addressing that, looking at some archaeological evidence, and said, hey, why don't we highlight that in this film? And then we'll also interview all these other experts in the field. Some might have agreed with him, some might have disagreed with him, but that kind of gave the story a center and a point of conflict that you could kind of work through.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I love watching documentaries because I always find some new bit of information that I had no idea existed. I think you've also been working on a pretty big documentary about Amazing Grace.
That's right, yeah. So it's been 250 years since the song Amazing Grace was written.
Wow.
And it's a really well-known song. A good number of people have heard that the writer of the song was a slave trader and who eventually renounced that and became a major force of influence in the abolition of the slave trade. And John Newton lived over in England. I think it's interesting, there's a religious aspect to his conversion, but his conversion to the Christian faith actually happened after he was actually a slave for a while, but before he became a slave ship captain. And so it's not like what a lot of people kind of summarize the story of, like, here's a guy, he's a bad guy, he's a slave ship captain, he has a religious experience in a storm at sea, becomes a pastor and writes Amazing Grace. It's actually like he was a slave on the coast of Africa, got mixed up in a storm, gave his life to God, and then stayed in the slave industry, became a captain, and at one point he actually has 2 diaries that he's keeping. One is a spiritual diary where he's a very young Christian and he's working through his faith, and the other one is like his captain's log where he's keeping track of the slaves and this and that. And that juxtaposition of religious faith that would believe that everybody's created in God's image and treating people as property as slaves, that is a painful juxtaposition. And so to kind of see how he wrestles with those concepts as a Christian, I think is really interesting, as opposed to the kind of the canned Hollywood version.
Yeah.
So,
how would you? That's a pretty emotional, big thing to try to talk about in film. And film is a difficult medium, I think, because often it can seem very disconnected.
mm,
How do you make something that connects to the emotions strongly and stays rooted in what it is, what you're trying to say, rather than kind of drifting off and making it feel strangely out there, I guess.
yeah, no, that's so. In a documentary, sometimes it can be academic. It can be focused on the facts, which fair enough. So, in order to bring the emotional aspect into the storytelling part, we did a docudrama. So, where we have reenactment scenes, so like the storm at sea, or John Newton on the African coast, or when he first meets his wife. But we also worked with John Rhys Davies, the actor, and he lives on the Isle of Man. He's best known for a couple roles. Sala from Indiana Jones, which Indiana Jones 5, he's in there, right? He's like Indiana Jones' best buddy. And also, he's Gimli from The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
So, which is funny because he's pretty tall, actually. He's not a dwarf.
Yeah.
And so, what John Rhys Davies did is he acted out a couple scenes for us, but he provided a straight-to-camera telling as well as the old John Newton looking back on his life. And so, by using quotes that John Newton had written, because he was well known for doing a lot of letter writing, we are able to have John Newton tell of his story in his own words. And when you get somebody who's like a trained Shakespearean actor, like John Rhys Davies, they can look straight into the camera and capture your attention.
Yeah.
So, there's Newton writes about his incredible guilt of being involved in the slave trade. He writes about the fact that he can't really stand in judgment of people, that he has to walk softly all his days because of his involvement. And so when you have that being delivered by John Rhys Davies with this amazing accent, it really helps to bring that emotional aspect to life. And then you can cut to an interview with a scholar, or Dr. Bruce Hindmarsh, who is our John Newton expert. So yeah, so you can kind of blend those two things back and forth.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think with documentaries as well, there's the need to make the information as true to what it actually is and not spread any misinformation.
Right.
So have there been any times where you've been presented with a decision where you're not super sure if this was fact, or maybe lost in translation at all?
Right. So what I like to do in that is just show that, there's controversy surrounding this. There are different perspectives surrounding it. We had that in one case where we were having some manuscripts that we went to the Vatican Library in Rome to go see. And the manuscript is one of the oldest of the New Testament. And the thing is it's so significant because it shows the ending of one book and then the start of another. And it shows them on the same page. And that's very, very important because it shows that these books were distributed together very early on. They weren't just always apart from one another. So the actual original manuscript for that film, we shot the original manuscripts for everything except for that one. That one, we had to shoot what's called the facsimile, which is a painstaking recreation of that. And even that facsimile was so closely guarded that it was incredibly difficult for us to get in there and shoot it. Well, when we when we shot it, we went through there, we interviewed the person who's in charge of the Vatican Library, we interviewed some other scholars, and we put on display the controversy regarding, just how old is this document?
Mhm.
And so when we got that material in front of the people who, let's say, steward that document, they are not there at the Vatican. It's another organization that owns that and takes care of that. They were like, oh, I don't know. And we had to really kind of walk through that whole thing. How many seconds did we spend on that document? How fairly did we present the controversy around it? Because they weren't scared that putting out there that there was controversy. They just really wanted to make sure that we were fair and not trying to tip the scales in one way or the other. So painstakingly went through that, every shot, every second, compared, hey, here's how many seconds we spent on these other manuscripts. We spent like 10 more seconds on that manuscript than the others. And we were able to say, this indicates, I know it's only 10 seconds, but it indicates the importance of this particular manuscript. And then eventually they said, okay, we're good with how you are treating this. You can go ahead and use this footage in your film. But that's the kind of unpredictable thing that you'll run into.
Yeah. How do you make sure you're shooting enough on the day? What do you prep to get ready to make sure you've got everything, because you can't go back.
Right. So in my way of working, the backup plan is motion graphics. To work with a good animator or motion graphics person who can provide supplementary material that was not shot on the day is really key. So Fred Sprinkle, who is our visual effects guy, who did so much of that work and that design, was really able to come into some of those sequences and produce graphics where we could kind of stretch that out. So you always have these two things where you can do graphics and you can do voiceover. And that kind of is your safety net in documentary. So you can shoot as much as you can and shoot your interviews and plan your interviews, but you still find spots and moments where you're like, oh, I wish I had another visual. So working with a good animator is really key.
Yeah, you mentioned animation, and I've always dreamed about animating things, but I've never really gotten into it. Have you done anything on the side of animators, or do you normally hire them?
Yeah, so I've used some After Effects, some Apple Motion. Those are motion graphics applications. But really, like on Amazing Grace, Alexis Anaya, we worked with him on that. He's actually a motion graphic artist out of Mexico that was on the team and works for Faith Life. And so I wanted to work with him again. And so, he did the whole intro and everything like that. It's really it's its own discipline. And there are really sub-disciplines within animation, graphics, and visual effects. So finding somebody, though, who can produce what go known as motion graphics, usually they use Adobe After Effects, is really an important thing. And somebody who really knows, for documentary, who knows typography. So how to lay out text in a well-designed way and communicate well through text. Because you sometimes need to pull things like quotes or maps, timelines, those kind of things, and incorporate that into your storytelling.
With storytelling, how do you go about that from the start to finish? Like, what is the process? Because that's a complex thing, whether you're doing narratives or documentaries.
Yep. Yeah. So there is a book called Story, which is a great book, and it really outlines this idea of the hero's journey, which is now taught in schools and stuff like that. It's kind of known as the meta-narrative. And probably the easiest illustration of somebody that would know that would be like the story of Star Wars. So you have Luke Skywalker, who's, on the backside of the desert. He is the hero, but he's in the wrong place. He receives a call to go on an adventure, which he, hesitates. Then he gets a weapon, right? His lightsaber. Goes off, saves the galaxy with the lightsaber, grows into something larger, effectively has a time where he sort of dies to his old self, comes back to life as, now he's a Jedi master, and he defeats, the villain.
Yeah.
That hero's journey method of storytelling is really something that is repeated over and over and over again. And for me personally, as a Christian, what I find interesting is a passage in the Bible where it says that God has set eternity in their hearts. And there was another quote by C.S. Lewis, and he said that fairy stories, or what we would call fairy tales, prepare us for the story, talking about the story of Jesus. And when the story of Jesus is also known as the greatest story ever told, right? And the story of Jesus is very similar to the story of Luke Skywalker, or this meta myth, this meta story where there's a hero who leaves his home, comes to save his people, dies, is resurrected, and overcomes darkness. Some people would say, well, that just indicates that Jesus' story is just another fairy tale. But personally, I would say, I think that that illustrates that Jesus' story is actually the foundation for that yearning for his story that's in all of our hearts. So when you go to tell a story, what I find is that often when you begin to pull on that hero's journey, you pull on something that is deeper and more ingrained in the human psyche than you might realize. For Fragments of Truth, I said, like, look, these little manuscripts, these are kind of like our hero here. They're wanting to be understood, they're dug up, they're discovered. There's all this controversy about back and forth, and they're dating, and the veracity of the stories within them, and then you kind of come out on the backside with like, hey, our kind of thesis there is this is there's a lot more credibility to the integrity of their text than you realize, and so that kind of story is great. You can apply it to a few pieces of papyrus, or you can apply it to I produced this little kind of like a Hallmarky film, The Farmer and the Belle, which is like a sweet kind of like kids Christmas movie, and you have the very similar kind of thing about the core hero there. So I think when you're going to tell a story, trying to touch something that is deeper and more innate within people is the real key, and that's how you're going to resonate with your viewers.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And so you're kind of saying you use the hero story almost as a template for most stories.
I think that's where it kind of gets, that for me, that's where it gets started.
Yeah.
And another example of that is that you have your conflict. It's kind of like a reverse of a roller coaster. So you get going, and then it kind of tapers off, and then it sort of builds and builds, and then you come down, you build and build, and you come down, you build and build, and then you woo, and then you go off on the big one. And so you can take that little roller coaster of dips and valleys and ascending conflict, and you can apply that to something as short as a 30-second commercial, and where you have implied obstacles that people are having to overcome. And then there is you might think of like as a Holy Land. There's an end goal that they're trying to get to. This is what they desire, but somehow there are obstacles in the way, and those obstacles then become bigger. But then, with the help of X, some product, if we were making a commercial, then you say, oh, but with the help of this deodorant, you won't smell bad.
Yeah.
It helps you. So that deodorant or whatever it is, that it becomes the lightsaber. That product becomes the lightsaber to help the potential customer, the Luke Skywalker character, defeat the challenges that they have. So that's how I put that in there.
Yeah. Slight change. When working from script to screen, what do you usually do? Editing, working with the writer. What's your process to get in?
It all depends on the project, really. Sometimes it's like adapting a book. So I did this film called The Unseen Realm, which was a documentary that was featuring the work of Dr. Michael S. Heiser. he was a PhD who worked over here at Lucas Bible Software for a long time. He recently passed away, but really well known. Hundreds of thousands of copies of the book sold. And he had done a more popular version of it called Supernatural. So I took that book and basically went through and created a screenplay off of that. And there were several other PhDs who came in, and they appreciated his work and that they wanted to help out on the project. So all of them did straight to camera. So we had worked out the script, adapted the book, wrote up the script, had our, Mike Heiser, our content expert, edit that. Okay, we've got it to where it's spot, everything there. But the problem that we ran into with the unseen realm in conceptualizing it was, what is the visual story here? So that's why my little production company is Visuals First Films. Because if you're going to put something on the screen, you need to take advantage of the medium, right? And so, of course, there's things like this where we have an interview just kind of interested. Oh, what does this person say? How do they look? But for a documentary film, after a while, you get tired of just looking at that person, right? So you think, well, how do we create a visual story about a topic that's the unseen realm, that has this idea that a lot of religious art over the decades has unintentionally influenced our ideas about what's going on in the biblical text, and that it comes more out of the Middle Ages as opposed to the ancient Near East, where a lot of these stories were birthed. So how do we overcome that? Well, one of the main problems is we don't have actual references for what these folks were thinking in a lot of ways. We need a visual story. We need a conflict. So we ended up working with individual artists and abstract artists. And so we have one here. We had the one down in Texas, down on the border, another out in South Carolina, one in Vancouver, and we gave them a portion of the script. And we just said, hey, can we film you creating a piece of artwork that illustrates this this part of the story? And so we worked down with Jim LePage, who would pour paints, and it was talking about the kind of the state of chaos, and so he'd do black paint and this paint. We use a little probe lens to get in there, and you'd see the paint kind of intersect and bubble out. And then that was the name of, I think it was Descend, which was like his piece of artwork. And so in that way, even if it was just the motion of two different colors of paints kind of intersecting, it was like, okay, that's some visual conflict that we could put under lines of somebody talking about angels and demons or something along that, and you could see it get there. So you're always trying to go like, how can I use this visual medium to help tell a story, even if on the surface it doesn't seem like a very visual story?
Yeah, sure. I think also with film is an art method, and that's interesting that you were working on a project where you were analyzing art and then in another art medium.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah, I think that's something that slips past a lot of people, that it is an art form, and it's not just big budget movies that are going out. There's vision behind it. There's always somebody behind it that's trying to produce something that says something.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important.
Yeah, it's true. It says something, and different filmmakers will gravitate towards different stuff. Some people just want to make you laugh, right?
Yeah.
Some people just want to entertain, and some people, just want to. What I think of is like filmmakers like that are really good at sort of easing the pain of life, right?
Yeah.
Or some people are like great at creating a fantasy world where you just forgot your problems for 2 hours. I think that's great. I love a fun movie. It's like I just watched John Wick 4, right, in the theater. I just thought it was great. Now I know a bulletproof, 3-piece suit is not going to stop a car, but it's okay. It was fun,
Yeah.
So so for documentary filmmaking, a lot of that, or even some narrative filmmaking, a lot of it is focused on meaning. Like using that to like get to deeper meaning than what you see on the surface. Yeah. And for me, I like that aspect, at least trying and making that effort, trying to show somebody something that they haven't seen before, even though maybe they've looked at it, a bunch of times.
Yeah.
So
I think also just talking about telling the story, we talk about, there's the famous expression, a picture can tell, 1,000 words.
Yeah.
But a full-length movie,
right.
Now you're getting into telling full books and full narratives.
Yeah, and the thing with filmmaking that you don't have is, in the best sense, you don't have the internal narrative of the characters. When you read a novel, the novelist can tell you what that character is thinking. If you watch a movie and there's a whole bunch of voiceover telling you what the character is thinking, it's really kind of boring. Like, a little touch of it here or there, fine. But generally, it's like, I'm watching the movie, show me what is happening. And so that, on the sense, is a disadvantage to filmmaking, because it is hard to illustrate internal conflict, and it's hard to see the internal change that is happening within somebody. But that is where really the art is when you work with actors, because actors are able to use their actions and their expressions to show the change or the turmoil that is happening within a character. And so that the opportunity to work with an actor and then for them to put out this emotional thing in front of you, like on set, that is absolutely magical. And it's like, to share in that moment makes all the other work worthwhile, because you're watching something like get created right in front of you, a performance that's never happened before and will never happen again. And the cameras are rolling and you're capturing that creative energy that was expressed in that moment. And in a sense, I feel like that's what makes filmmaking valuable, is you capture a moment that exists, and then people can go and experience that moment again. You know?
Is there anything that we haven't discussed yet that you might want to talk about at all?
I think that one of the things that's really interesting is, what is AI going to do to professional creatives? Yeah. I mean, obviously nobody knows. We have no clue, so any prognostication is out the window. But it's fun to talk about this moment where we have generative AI. And my knee-jerk reaction is that it is a house built on theft. When you and I put our pictures or videos out on the internet, I had no idea that there was going to be a technology that was going to come, scan all of that, and then be able to regurgitate original work in that style. Mm-hmm. And so when I take a look at this moment and I say, and I'm as interested in the commercial possibilities of generative AI, the ability to create art just with a text prompt. I love that idea. But what I don't like is that it's coming from an artist who created a piece of art, and that it just scanned them and made a cheap photocopy of that. So my fear, and we shouldn't make decisions based on fear, but my fear is that generative AI will steal from artists and then put them out of work. Mm-hmm. And that we could see, 50% of the people involved in creative work professionally put out of business because their work was used to create the work that will replace them. And there feels something fundamentally wrong about that. And I'm also concerned that the threat of that scraping will cause artists to be forced to draw back what they share online.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I'm going to make something and put it out there, only to have it scanned, a cheap copy created, and then that sold to somebody who could have employed me, then my feeling might be, well, I'm not going to put my stuff out there.
Yeah.
That could be writing, it could be visuals, it could be so I look at that and I say, wow, that has the opportunity to really cause the arts to retreat back behind paywalls, museums. Museums are wonderful like this, but it used to be like you couldn't see the painting unless you went to it, But now you can see the painting that's online. Well, who's going to put their painting online if it can be copied and stolen? So
yeah.
I think that one of the major challenges right now is, forget about this, like robots are going to, take over the world and kill us all like Terminators. I'm just like, how can we protect artists so that they can be employed to produce their art, and so that there is not a chilling effect on them actually putting their artwork out there? Because if you are a creative person, I believe you need to create in order to be healthy. If you clamp that down and you don't share that art with anybody, you don't create that art, then that will harm you as an individual because you're squelching that creative impulse that's within you. So I hope that we can, figure out ways to go forward, in this moment, and for there to be a future for for professional artists.
Yeah. So mentioning AI, I think the predominant one right now is ChatGPT, that can just generate any text because it has basically unlimited, knowledge about any written work.
Right.
Have you explored any of, its responses in your own work, or have you played around with it at all?
I've played around with it. So the thing that I do some writing in the space of video production and film production for a couple blogs, the OWC Pro blog, Frame.io's blog, and others. And the thing I like about it is it's able to quickly distill a topic. I was writing about something as mundane as hard drive storage, RAID storage. So I was like, okay, what are the points someone should consider? Mm-hmm. So he's going to go look at every article that's written and be like, yeah, hey, here's 5 things that you should consider. I'm like, oh yeah, I should really mention that. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to use some of those points in my outline and then create it. I think that's really helpful. I mean, it just saved me a bunch of time from looking at that. And so I would also, I love the idea that it can synthesize large bodies of conversation over time. And so, for instance, I experimented, I told you about Dr. Mike Heiser, who wrote The Unseen Realm, the book. And so he's done a lot of writing in the world of biblical studies, right? And so I went, hey, give me a commentary on Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Give me a commentary about Genesis 1:1 in the style of Mike Heiser. Right? And so it pulled in references and things that he would have written. Now, for me to have taken that and put it somewhere, that would have been bad. But it was like, oh, here's the references that he would have used. And then I put in, who are the people who disagree with Mike Heiser? And then it gave me 3 or 4 names, and it linked off to those books. So, that was pretty great that I could basically take an individual in their area of expertise and get what do they think, and what do people disagree, and how do they disagree, and put that together. That really would have taken a specific amount of knowledge. You have to find books or electronic or whatever to do. So I really do think that there are beneficial things that AI can bring to the table when it's used as a tool to save labor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I write stories as well, and I wrote a really short story, and I put it into ChatGPT and said, go for it.
Mm.
And what it spit out was very strange. It sounded like what I'd written, obviously, because that's what it does. But I didn't think it was actually very good. Like you said, it was kind of a knockoff.
Right.
It never captured the tone or the original idea I was going for.
Mm-hmm.
And because it furthered the story, it didn't get the original idea. The original idea of the story was that it ended, and then it just decided it added more. And I think that's an important distinction between humans and AI. There's an emotional impact to stories, and I think that's something that an AI just can't get as much as I've played with it.
It can't do, and the question I think is, will it be able to simulate or ape or copy? We know it's not genuine. So that kind of goes back to that moment where I was telling you about seeing an actor on set.
Yeah.
And in that moment, you're capturing actual creative energy. Like they're bringing a performance that's never existed. It's something that's real. The performance is real, even if the character is fake, right? Or, the actor. But the performance is real. That's what makes it special to me. A painter goes and they make a painting, right? Like we could walk around. I'm sure that there are some paintings here, some mixed media stuff. That painting is a capture of creative energy that was spent in that moment. And so you're not buying a visual item. You're buying like a moment. You're placing value on a moment in time and a creative expression. AI won't be able to do that. I don't think. But the thing that is so interesting to me, I was talking about someone like the word artificial, it means something that is man-made. And so there is something about artificial intelligence, this man-made intelligence that falls short of humanity. And in my mind, I think of that as that is because people are special. We are different from animals, and we are different from computers. And traditionally, Christian theologians would call that, and Jewish theologians imagine as well, the image of God. That we bear in ourselves something special and unique, and part of that is our ability to create. And so I hope that we continue to value that, not just emotionally, but we also find ways to reward creative labor as well, so that in the days of the Renaissance, you'd have patrons. They would pay the way for a particular artist to spend time sculpting something or making something. I hope that we can keep that value on the arts, and we can continue to see these creative expressions and not allow ourselves to be content with kind of robbing ourselves of that and settling for copies.
Yeah, and I think we've talked throughout the episode just about the importance of storytelling, and I think, in my opinion, humans should be the ones telling the stories.
Yeah.
Maybe one day AI can generate really human-like text, and it already, does that. But there's something special about knowing that this story was created and, worked on by a real person.
A real person, yeah, totally.
Yeah, and I think that that hope is also important to humanity. I think our ability to feel, our ability to see the world, I think that's special, and I think putting that into storytelling and into our everyday lives even is a very important thing that we should hold on to.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you,
We'll link some of Reuben's work down in the description, so feel free to check that out. And thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, appreciate being here. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. All right, see you all next week.